The ancient Catholic Church kind of just melded into the Roman Catholic Church. Essentially, you had one body until the Protestant time. There was one church, the Protestant time, and then you divided it and splintered in all these different groups. Well, I mean, it'd be nice, it'd be a lot easier as we study these groups, and that sounds good in theory, but that's just not in reality the way it worked out. Because we've already seen, remember the Montanists, the Monarchians? You got the dynamic Markians and then the modalistic Markians. These people who take different views of God and the deity of Christ, and we're going to find those different views on the deity of Jesus as well, in particular. So it's not really accurate to think there was one monolithic church until the Protestant age, and then it divided. That's just not the way it was. It was messy. It was just like real life. There were a lot of, quote, churches from the earliest times. And not only after Constantine became member and kind of legalized things, did you get a more of a formal structure, because the state began to structure things. The first kind of division here is the Novatian schism in Rome, here in the 3rd century, the 200s. And again, we're not talking about a heresy, so much a false teaching per se. It was a division. It's just kind of they had some different views on things, but not to the point where it was so much Bible related. And that's always been a problem in the church. You get something that people are strongly opinion on, and it may not be something that's a thus saith the Lord, but it's still something that causes some division. So here's what's happened. One of the greatest scholars in the church at Rome in the 3rd century, Novatian. And the Rome church was divided when this guy Cornelius was elected instead of, the favored Novatian. Everybody wanted him, and he didn't get it. So a second election was held, and the second church with a second bishop now. You had 2 bishops there, where you had one was to go on for 400 years. Later on, we're going to, by the way, in church history, see that there were a couple of different popes going on at the same time. One in France, one in Rome, and there was, a bickering back and forth.
One in Colosseum.
Yeah.
There's 3 of them.
Yeah, there's 3 at one time, and that, that was a whole mess right there too. So here you have this division here, and the issue over which the church divided, the Bishop of Rome here had presumed in his role as this monarchical bishop, power. Remember, he's not leading with a bunch of guys now. It's like he's the deal there. And he presumed to let these people in the church who had apostatized. Again, they, during the persecution, had, it's like one of those things when they were offering incense to Caesar or so. They said Caesar is Lord because they didn't want to die. They didn't want their children to die. It's like, I think I know hopefully what I'll say. But what if they have my kids over here and they got a sword to them, or my whole family? That had to be extremely difficult. And some of these Christians, they relented under pressure, and it was tough, and they, it was unfortunate, but it happened. I mean, that's what would happen today, unfortunately. You'd have some people stand strong, other people who want to be strong, but they didn't, and because of varying circumstances. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm just saying that's the way it happened. I bet it would happen now. And so he let them back in the church. Who later, these people repented, and Lord, I'm sorry this happened, I was wrong. And he says, you know what, it's okay, you can come back to church now. Well, not everybody like that. Novatian held that apostasy under the threat of pain or death is unpardonable, can't be forgiven. And this bishop let him back in. So you got 2 things going on. Does the bishop, first of all, does he even have the authority to absolve sin? Novatian said, no. Who do you think you are? And then the other side, that okay, if you do have a congregation with all these apostatized members who come back in, is that a legitimate church? Some people are like, well, you know what, if God wants them for eternity, you just let Him decide. That's not for us to decide so much. You see why persecution was a bad thing for the church in a sense. Here you had people who, in tough times, in a weak moment, they gave in, very sorrowful, no doubt, a lot of them, and they realized that it was a huge mistake. They repented, they were genuine, they were pious, and now you've got this whole schism. You've got people who would not associate with these people over here. The church now is divided because of this, and all because of persecution came to church. So it was definitely brought some negative things. And again, we're not talking about so much a theological issue so much, not a heresy, but more of a matter of opinion in a sense. More of church polity and governing. Then you have this Donatist schism, North Africa. The other one took place in Italy. This took place in North Africa. You know, what are we talking about over here? Carthage or so? Over here in the west still. And a bishop was accused of surrendering some copies of the Bible during the persecution. Remember, who was it? Right before Constantine became emperor, you know, one of these emperors wanted to make sure all the Bibles were done away with and burned and extinguished. In fact, he thought he had done so. He made a monument to the Bible's been extinguished, you know. And after he went out of power and Constantine became emperor, he asked Eusebius, the church leader, to see if he could find for him any copies of the Bible. Where any left. Immediately, 50 copies of the Bible were brought to him. There you go. Isn't that great? It's like God had the last laugh. That's always the case throughout history. You know, the Bible says the flowers, you know, the grass withers, the flowers die type thing. God's word endures forever. It does. But this bishop was accused of, you know, surrendering copies and you know, but now they're talking about letting him back in the church. Part of the church elected an alternative bishop. And Donatus succeeded this bishop, and his name, you know, given to the schismatic church by historians. But the issue, you know, some said, well, no, those who said no, you know, is it okay for this bishop to come back in the church? They followed this guy named Donatus, who, by the way, was a native African. And those who followed him, by the way, were Africans. And those who sided with the other bishop were Italian. Just kind of, you understand what's going on here? It wasn't just, you know, they're fighting for the issue. It was like there was culture involved. And it was like, you know, well, he's one of us, so we're going to go with him. And it just happened that all the Africans went with Donatus, and he's African, and all the others who were Italian went with the other guy, right? And they, you know, it was like it was a clear line of demarcation, you know. And so you understand, it wasn't just like, you know, we're going to stand up for an issue no matter what, where you are culturally, racially. We're just going to stand up for the right thing. It was not that way. It's kind of like in our Restoration movement. Right around the Civil War, even before that, there was a little bit of an issue of the musical instrument. You know, should you have instruments in the church or not? And really, at that point, it was a matter of opinion. I believe it's still a matter of opinion. And it originated really in one of these churches up in Illinois, up north, in Yankee country. And you know, the Restoration Church did not really divide during the Civil War. We were kind of the only religious body that didn't. You had the American Baptist and you know the Methodist and things like that divided. We didn't divide per se, but it's interesting because after the Civil War, the musical instrument really became a divisive issue. But you know where the line of demarcation was, you know, where it was like the Mason-Dixon line. But the whole issue started in Illinois. But have you noticed that most of your a cappella, non-instrumental churches in the Christian church are where? South. Texas, Tennessee, Alabama, Not many up in Indiana too much, or that. Well,
No piano in Oregon? Is there?
Well, that's too far out west. I mean, they migrated, but my main point is, it's just interesting how it became an issue, but it divided people culturally. But the issue wasn't really the issue. That's how people are, and things are complicated. Culture gets in, race gets in. When the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter, people drew the lines. It was like, and by the way, a lot of the churches down south, they couldn't afford a piano. North you could, south you couldn't, and so that's one of the reasons they didn't have instruments down there. They just couldn't afford a piano. Yeah, it's expensive back in the 1800s. By the way, we're going to have a class solely dedicated to the Restoration Movement. We're going to talk about Alexander Campbell, Thomas Campbell, Bart W. Stone, one of my raccoon, John Smith, and that's a lot of fun to talk about those guys because it's pioneer America, the Daniel Boone type years, and it's fun to talk about.
Do you know of any other kind of church who doesn't use a piano? Or is this unique to the Christian church?
It's interesting. When we cover that, I think that is leftover Calvinism, actually. Calvin, we're going to find out in the Reformation movement, took this idea to the extreme of no physical things at all. Because he followed kind of Augustine, he was influenced by Plato, who had this line down here, the physical was evil. So he took out everything. Hymn books, pews, it was like, that's why they removed baptism, by the way, too. It's a physical thing. It's part of salvation. You can have that. They even removed, like I said, hymn books, things like that. So, yeah, probably the instruments were not there. I don't know.
I can't imagine the Quakers having one. I didn't even think about
Yeah, there are
that.
probably some other groups that, for various reasons, it's innovation. The same idea, it's an innovation. It's not part of the New Testament per se. And so the hermeneutic there is when the Bible is silent, it prohibits you, versus our view is it gives you liberty as long as you don't violate the other commandments and promises of Scripture, right? By the way, if you take that idea that silence forbids, it's like a Pandora's box. It's like, where do you stop? And you see that within the instrumental or the non-instrumental Church of Christ sometimes. It just is divided, subdivided, and divided, and divided, and divided. Well, I got off here, sorry. Anyway, so there was another schism here, another division in the church. I just want you to be aware of that. And again, there were racial overtones to this, right?
Yes.
People don't do things for simple reasons. I mean, on the surface they may say that, but underneath it's not that simple usually. It's like over the years, man, I've known this as a preacher, going to visit somebody, and they'll say, well, I don't like the music there. But you know what? Come to find out, it's not really the issue. The issue is they have a problem with somebody. The issue a lot of times is not the issue. And you got to dig a little deeper sometimes. You got to have a relationship with somebody to do that. You know what I'm saying? Now sometimes it is the issue. Sometimes, I'm just picking music, but it could be anything. Sometimes that's not really the issue. The issue is something else. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I'm not a psychologist, though. I'm just a preacher, so I better stay away from that. So let me look at some of these teachings that were universally accepted by the ancient Catholic Church. Again, the years are from 30 to 323. That's this section we're covering. And this idea of a single Catholic Orthodox Church, identified in terms of writings of the Apostle, traditions of the Apostle, handed down orally, bishops in a line of apostolic succession. We talked about that. That kind of came to be accepted by the ancient Catholic Church. The idea of a New Testament canon. The standard of the Bible we're talking about, the 27 books. It came in response again to these heresies. When certain alternatives, came about. Marcion's Bible. It's like today. You got the Joseph Smith people, the Mormons, and he's got his Book of Mormon. When that came out, doesn't it force Christians who are Orthodox to defend the 27 books of the New Testament only? Doesn't it, cause you to say, well, why don't we accept that? And don't you need to have a defense against that? In a sense, when those things kind of come up, it forces the church always to think about, okay, why is it we believe what we believe? And why don't we just have 27 books versus these? Why is that not another testament? Why not others, right? So this is what heresy does. And it forced the idea that, listen, there's a standard. That's what canon means. There's this measure, standard, that it's orthodox, that, it's solid. It's not going to change. And this is what we were talking about earlier, Gary. There's 3 periods of time here identifiable as far as how this evolved. The Bible, where we got today. In the years 80-30 to 150, the early church, started. The Old Testament, pretty much available in the, what I mean by the LXX, the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And by the way, included some apocryphal books. But they regarded that as Scripture. Pretty much everybody did. And by the way, we're not going to... this is just kind of for the sake of completeness for this class. I think it's important for you to know. You're not going to know all these details. We will probably discuss this in another class later on when we do a survey of the Bible, I think. You ever heard this? Of course, the Scripture, you've got the writings of the apostles and prophets, the Homologomena. Thank you for coming. And that just means that these are these books that were, that's obviously the Greek word, but they were universally recognized as Scripture. And by the way, from the very beginning. It wasn't like later on, they did have a council and say, well, this book should be in, this should be out. And they're the ones who decided that. Well, there were certain criterion, but there were some books that were already recognized. Everybody just, the 4 Gospels, the letters of Paul, and some others there. And then there were the question books, the Antilegomena, books that some were opposed. Did you realize the book of James? Martin Luther said it was a straw man. It should not be in the book of in the Bible. Did you realize that? Martin Luther pretty much rejected the book of James because he thought it contradicted the book of Romans that said we're saved by grace, and yet James says,
action.
Yeah. Now, I do think they're compatible there. I think they're looking at it from 2 different angles. Now, this is not a scripture class here, but that kind of thing went on for a little bit. So other books later proved not to be in the canon. You can look at some of those. Other literature, though, that was just used for the church, like the letter of Clement that wrote to the church in Rome. That's some good insight. And I don't think it should be in the Bible, but I do think, boy, it gives me some insight what they were thinking, their attitudes, their worship, that we can study and we can find out in this class. Think about it, if we didn't have those letters, we would be at a loss. There would be a gap there. We didn't know how things, after the apostles died out, how things were kept going. And then you had another age where age 150, 200, things had to tighten up because you had these groups teaching false teaching, Marcion. And so these books that were spoken against were examined, debated. The different books were accepted in some areas areas still resisted. And then in 80, 200 to 400, we finally had a consensus agreement. The first canon extant. You know what that word extant means? In existence. Which is exactly, as we have it, was published by this guy Athanasius in AD 367. And he was the first to use this word canon, the standard, he said. And then in AD 388, an important development, Jerome translated the Vulgate. You've heard of the Vulgate? It's the Latin translation of the Bible, the New Testament. And it was important because we're talking about east-west here on the map. In the East, what was the language over here? What was the primary?
Greek.
Greek. Rome, it was what?
Latin.
Latin, right? And so they had their Bible, New Testament written in Greek. But you got a lot of people who don't read Greek here, per se, now, and so now they get a Bible, and this was written by a Western man, Jerome. And so, and it was kind of like what the King James Version Bible was to the Protestant world for 500 years. Equivalent, that's kind of what it was. Remember, the King James Version, 1611 to up till recent time, was dominant till, probably the NIV came out in a sense. I saw a blurb on Facebook the other day. I had to say something because my church is like one of those King James Version only, and they were making fun of the NIV, and I had to say something. It was like, well, both of them are good translations. And both of them have some problems. But the Latin Vulgate, for hundreds of years, is going to be the standard for the West. Right? And that was a pretty good translation in that day for what the manuscripts they were able to pull from. And so Jerome is the guy who did that. And once the Vulgate was accepted, kind of the debate, for the most part, which books should go in, it was kind of ended. Because he put in there these 27 books. And it was this, kind of the debate was over. It was settled. And again, there were some different grounds for how do you determine this. Well, the first one is apostolicity. That is, was this written by an apostle? Or was it somebody, a close associate of an apostle? Because if they didn't have any association with an apostle, then what are they doing writing a book of the New Testament, right? Okay, look, Matthew, and then you think about our Luke. I mean, Luke was not an apostle. A lot of people probably think he is, but he wasn't. He was a close associate of Paul. What about, Mark? Mark was not an apostle. A lot of people think Mark was a close associate of Peter, and Peter's the one who helped kind of dictate that to him in his experience. It's Mark's gospel. So,
Didn't Peter write that too, though?
well, Peter did. That's true. He did write his letters in the New Testament.
I mean, didn't he write a gospel? The Gospel of Peter?
No. There might be a book called the Gospel of Peter, but it wasn't. And that's what people did. They would put a title on there, like, written by Peter, because it would sell some books, and then the content of the book, you can just tell sometimes that this is different than the Bible. It's like some of these apocryphal books talk about almost like these magical things, versus the Bible is still legitimate, real stories and it's spiritual character. The universality, was the book accepted by the church? And the inspiration, did the book give evidence of being divinely inspired? Did it contain prophecies and stuff? And then we've already talked about the Apostles' Creed. Remember this? It was a baptismal creed used by the church at Rome. And by the way, this is important for maybe those who, some of us were raised in the Restoration movement, to discuss this idea of the Apostles' Creed, because if you were kind of raised in a denominational of the church, this has kind of been a kissing cousin relationship. You know what I mean? Because you're kind of a little more familiar with that. I grew up in the Restoration movement. I never heard of the Apostles' Creed. Not until I got into college. But certain churches out there, and some of you guys probably had to memorize it, use certain parts of it, then did you not? I had no idea what the Apostles' Creed until I got to Bible College or seminary. And Apostles' Creed, well, I didn't know they wrote a creed. By the way, they didn't, did they? Well, they did. It's called the New Testament. And this is not it, but we don't use creeds per se, at least not formally, in the Restoration movement. So this is sort of new to us in a sense. But again, there are references to this very early on, 2nd century, 150. The exact form, not really knowing, because it was constantly being amended and changed, because you got new heresies come in. Well, we got to change it to this, and add this to that to go against these things. It was not, even the original, they knew it was not written by the apostles. Everybody knew that. It was just, this is what the teaching of the apostles would have, this is reflected their teachings in a sense. It helped people. Now because, remember this idea, I believe in one God, creator, maker of heaven and earth. Well, that ruled out the Marcionites. They didn't believe in the Old Testament God who created the heaven and earth. So you couldn't say that as a good heretic, as a good Marcionite. You in good faith could not say, I believe in God, the Father, the maker of heaven and earth. So this kind of weeded out those people before you baptize them. And the creed in its present form, a lot of churches today, was finally fixed around the 8th century. But until then, it was still in flux because of different heresies and such. What about the second coming of Jesus? Well, back in the 1st century, it's like, don't you get this feel when you read the New Testament, by the way? It's like Jesus could come any second. And as the 1st century and the 2nd century began to go by, 3rd century, this expectation, in a sense, began to diminish. As the nature, it's just kind of the nature of things, But, and Peter said, he addressed this, by the way, in his letter. He says, because just because the apostle that Jesus hasn't come back doesn't mean he's not. That's not good logic. Because God, timing is, the way he thinks about time is a lot different for an eternal God. One day, for God, it's like 1,000 years. 1,000 years like a day. So don't necessarily think that God's forgotten, obviously, or he's not going to come. But the expectation, obviously, was not maybe as fervent as it was in the beginning. And it's hard to keep that even as Christians today, isn't it? We go through periods where we think about it, some we don't. But it's almost like, I do expect the Lord to come before 11 o'clock tonight. Now we laugh at that, but isn't that the way we should be? I think before the news comes on tonight, the Lord's coming back. I don't know that, but you know what? I'm expecting. You know what I mean? I'm not saying, I'm being facetious here, but I'm also saying, you see, your reaction tells me in the church where we are. Yeah. And I'm the same way. Because it's like, yeah, coming back. I got a lot more life to live. Don't you know I got this stuff's going on? No, he says like a thief in the night. In other words, he doesn't really say when he's coming back. He just says, you got to be ready. And the other church was like, Maranatha, come Lord Jesus now. You understand it because there's so much persecution going on. It's like, well, sometimes life gets a little good and you're like, hey, come Lord, but can you wait another year or two or so, And many of the early church fathers believed that Jesus would set up 1,000-year physical reign upon the earth. This is kind of premillennial, not dispensational, but set up 1,000-year reign on earth as a kind of an extension of the church. See, this is an old idea, by the way. But it was not universally accepted. There were some who believed it, some who didn't, just like today. And that's a whole other class, by the way. That's eschatology. Right? And we could spend all night just talking about that. Hey, speaking all night, let's take a little break, and then we'll come back and we'll do the second part. Sure we're plugged into. Last time, there we go. It's definitely good. Yeah. Okay, we're section 2. Yay! Only took just 6 weeks. But boy, so much was important in that first section. The Imperial State Church.
You thinking this is going to be a 2-class thing?
Well, I had a lot more pages that I cut out of this thing. This is so that's the way it goes, though. Okay, now we're looking at the Imperial State Church, and now from the first ancient Catholic Church was from 30 to 8323. Now we're going from 323 to 604. And so this section is going to cover the history of the church in the Roman Empire after the persecution is over. Christianity is basically illegal in Christianity, and before the Roman Empire is completely wiped out, destroyed by the barbarians and things like that, the fall of Rome. Big picture, the relation to the church and the state, kind of setting this in historical context. I think this is good, like we did with last time. You know, you get up in the plane, you get the bird's eye view of things. What is, first off, the big picture, the decline of the Roman Empire. And it wasn't like this happened overnight. I mean, this had been some time coming. The way all empires do, you know, it's like you can see it coming incrementally, little by little, you know, economic regression. There were civil wars. Rome was literally falling apart from the inside out. Way almost all nations do eventually. You read culture and history, you know, the taxes were just crushing the people. They were trying to defend against these barbarians trying to get in and want what everybody else wanted, high civilization. We're going to talk about this a lot more, but these barbarians, it wasn't like, you know, they were just barbarian to the point, you know, I mean, they were barbarians, but the reason they wanted to is because they wanted to go to the beach. They wanted to be where it was warm. They wanted running toilets. I mean kind of silly here, but listen, the reason the barbarians wanted to come down there was because they had something good and we wanted part of that. They wanted civilization. You can't blame them. They didn't know how to be civilized because they didn't know it, but they wanted it. They saw it, and it was warmer down there. It's like, hey, let's go down to Florida. They got running toilets, air conditioner, and the beach. Let's go. And so Attila and all those other family packed up and said, let's get it. And then you had insufficiency, instability, corruption within the government. It was inept. You know, there was this overwhelming bureaucracy that could not be controlled, which was built on bribery. It's kind of like you look at our neighbors to the south in Mexico many times and things, how they've run things over the years. There's been bribery. Or Italy during Mussolini's time, or certain Arab countries, how things get done. You know, it's like in Mussolini in Italy. You know, it was pretty chaotic, but hey, at least the trains run on time. You know what I mean? When things fall apart like that, you know, you turn to somebody who can keep things going no matter how bad they are. Because one man, it's easier to make things happen without all this bureaucracy sometimes. Even though the one man may be a horrible person. And ultimately you'll pay for him too. It's like my wife's country down in Venezuela suffered under Chavez for many years, and now his other guy, Maduro, yeah. And so, but in America say, well, we'd never do that. Yeah, we would. If civilization fell apart, and you know, we would turn to somebody to lead us, even if it was a bad guy in a sense. Because at least the trains were on time. At least you kept civilization from falling apart. You know what? You do about anything. I'm not saying you, but I'm saying in society, so that there wouldn't be anarchy.
Right.
And that's what's kind of happened sometimes. That's what's happening there. And there was a spiritual decline. I mean spiritually as far as the pagan, you know, loss of the old Roman spirit, the old official Roman religions, and the reason, you know, that kind of kept them together. And Christianity, though, it undermined this paganism, obviously. You know, and the New Testament says, here are these guys that are turning the world upside down. Well, they actually turned things right side up. In Ephesus, they shut down the temple of Artemis. Well, that has going to have an effect on the whole Roman Empire, which is built on the premise of Caesar as Lord and all that. And so, which supported the theory of the imperial government. Gibbon, in his history, was right. Gibbon hated Christians. He blamed Christians on the fall of the Roman Empire, but he was kind of right. It imploded because it all fell apart because it was on a weak foundation of paganism and things like that. Now the Greek East and now the Latin West, they're beginning to drift apart more and more. Because over here, you've got civilization, here you've got backwater. And it's going back to the Stone Ages. Because you got the barbarians coming in, they're going to take away all that was, and we're going to find out you're going to have a vacuum there, and you know who's going to be left? Because you know what? The emperor, he's out of Dodge. He's over here in Constantinople. right? You see it over here? You probably can't see that. But in this part over here, it used to be Byzantine. It's the Byzantine, but that's where the power, society, everything resides. In the West, and remember, Rome's right on the edge of it, and the only person who's going to be left in power is the Bishop of Rome. And all that power is going to central in him. And it's like, that's why when the Huns come out, who is it that comes out? Somebody from the Roman government? No. The Bishop of Rome comes out. Because he's the one, basically, the people are turning to him because at least the church is holding things together. They're feeding the people. They're keeping society together. So you can't blame the people for turning to the only people that was in control. The Greek East would last for many more years, though, until about the 7th and 8th century, until the invasion of Muslims, the Muslims. And then in 476, we're going to find out Rome finally falls to the barbarians entering in. Look at this map again. You can't really see the details. At least you can see the line there of the east and west. And the major cities in the west are Rome, right? Obviously, Carthage, down here in northern Africa. These are some of still the main centers of influence and intellect. Over in the east, obviously, it's Constantinople, and you have Alexandria, which we already talked about, Cyrene, Antioch, over here. Those are some of the major centers, cities of influence. All right, B, now you begin to see the emergence of these Germanic peoples from the north. You know, this is where they're going to come from. And I'll have a map next week, a little better, where you have all these different tribes and Germanic peoples making their way in. Because the northern and west reach of the empire had really never been Romanized or Latinized. I mean, they never made inroads there because the people were so uncivilized. You know, they were so illiterate, so backwoods, backwater that it didn't take. You know? And so they had trouble there. And the Roman armies had been resisting barbarian invaders since before the days of Julius Caesar. You're talking about hundreds of years this has been in the works. And invasions began in 376 when the Visigoths crossed the Danube. And within a century, they had become a dominant force in Western Europe. The Huns raided Gaul. You know, Gaul is modern France. So you got the Visigoths, you got the Huns, and Rome was seized by the Vandals. The Vandals are from this area, northern Africa, as they would come this way. So, I mean, it's kind of like they're surrounded, you know, and it's only just a matter of time. The writing was on the wall. In 475, the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustus, by the way, in the west was deposed by Odoacer. And then the last century of Roman rule, supposed to be a last in there. The last century of Roman rule saw competing figures. Remember Attila the Hun, who did succeed in destroying this high civilization in the empire. We'll talk about him more later. But see, before they would kind of do a hit and run, you know, come in and you know, do what they could and then hightail it out of there. But now they begin to stay. They begin to occupy some of these areas. And you know what you did? You either defeated them or you made a treaty with them. You know, just accept that this is the way life's going to be now. Again, Spain and southern France, Italy, again, they were never Latinized. And as we talked about, northern France and Germany up there, Great Britain, Scotland, they were claimed by Rome, the Roman Empire, and they were occupied, but they were never really, Roman culture never took. And so, by the way, when the Protestant Reformation comes around, we're going to see this next time we talk about this class, It did not survive in lands that were Latinized. The ones that were Latinized, like Rome, southern France, Spain. Tell me, is that a stronghold of Protestantism today? Even today? France, Rome, Spain? No, what is that? It's Roman Catholic, strong. Because they were Latinized. The other ones were not, and it made a difference. That just kind of demonstrates how closely tied the Roman Catholic Christianity was to Roman culture, and still is. Protestantism prospered where the lands were not Latinized. The religion was tied to culture, culture was tied to religion. The rise of the imperial church state, Christianity was the one vital force, and the church was the one living organism in the Roman world during these last two, centuries of the empire. And so by the end of this period, the church is kind of the state-supported state religion. And 604 is the end of this. And the barbarian tribes were converted in large numbers to a form of Christianity that came upon the Roman world. So let me ask a question. Why did the Roman Catholic Church, when it finally came into existence, why was it so powerful? Well, the answer is because when, again, we talked about this a little bit, when Roman society crumbled as a whole, again, the only unifying factor was the church there in the West. And so the church was getting more and more centralized in its power, and that's what was happening. And the Roman Empire was not. They would become decentralized, while at the same time, the Roman church, the Roman, bishops and all that, they were gaining more and more power. Meanwhile, everybody else had moved over here, including the emperor, and just left it to the church basically to fend for themselves. And so the church, where there's a vacuum, they're going to take hold of that. And the expansion of the Byzantine Empire over here became known for its architecture, its splendor, high civilization. Again, when things were falling apart in the West, things in the East were quite a bit different. Again, Constantine moved his empire there. Byzantium is called Constantinople, now called Istanbul. Again, things are more stable in the East versus the West. That's important to note as we go into the second half of this class. Things are falling apart over there. Things over here are getting better a little bit, right? That's why over here you're falling into the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages. You're going back in time in a sense. What about the relation of the state and the church? Constantine understood that the only thing going in the West was the church. And so there were some developments. His three sons, not get into all that, but from now on, by the way, the Roman Empire will be referred to as the Byzantine Empire. It's interesting because when two cultures clash, unless one of the cultures simply obliterated, wiped out, the higher culture is always going to overcome the lower culture. And what the barbarians accepted, by the way, as biblical Christianity was not really biblical Christianity. It was kind of Latin Christianity. They accepted culture, again, more than religion. That's why they weren't fully indoctrinated. That's why Protestantism had more of a chance to convert some of these people later on. And again, now that the church was favored, it was okay. They favored the Catholic ones, the genuine. Not the heretics. Sunday was made a legal holiday. Remember before they had to hide underground in the catacombs, or the burial tombs, stuff like that. Now, Sunday made a holiday. Well, that's quite a bit of a change on behalf of the church. The state gave money for the construction of church buildings. How about that? Imagine in one generation, you're living where, it was illegal to worship in places of worship. Now, the government's writing checks out to build these basilicas. By the way, that's dangerous. Because the church was now tying itself to the state. And the state was going to use the church. And one day they're going to call upon the state or the church to, we need some favors here.
For an obligation.
Yeah. Scriptures were now in favor. It's interesting, these ecclesiastical courts are recognized. Church courts. People could choose between, you want to be tried in civil court or church court. The church had their own courts. And by the way, they're often better. They would judge adultery and stealing, and that's kind of hard for us to imagine today. But again, there was no separation of church-state in a sense. Copying of Scripture was financed, encouraged by the state. This guy Eusebius, we have some of the great manuscripts from this. You also increased restriction of paganism. Now you have a persecution in reverse. This is kind of an embarrassment, though, because now they begin to go out and persecute some of the heretics. Where before, it's like, well, we don't like some of these cults, so we'll go have them arrested down here,
That's a good Christian way.
Yeah, so these things are changing quite a bit here.
That's because there was no separation.
There wasn't, and they were tied. Yeah, that's right. There was no separation, and the church was, things had just done a 180 to the point where some things were not good.
And this is when?
This is from 324, 323 on, after
Okay,
Constantine.
so this is around 500s, right?
Yeah, all this is leading up to, the 300s, 400s, 500s. And now, again, disfavor shown to these schismatic groups. For example, the Donatists, the native party in North Africa, were suppressed because they threatened the unity of the empire. The church was the strongest thing going in the empire, so it needed unity at all costs. So we got to get rid of any of these schismatic groups, these fringe movements, Can't have that going. There was increase in control of the Catholic Church by the state. In a lot of ways, the state forced to control the church. This idea whoever pays the piper controls the tune. It's an old principle. The church appealed to the state for help against these heretical groups. And then look at number 4. You had this tremendous influx of pagans. Now they once persecuted and stopped, many became Christians. Before it, it had been a capital crime to become a Christian, or it was, you could be in trouble. And there were a lot of people who were genuinely, converted, and they wanted to be Christians all along. And many came in though because you know what? Everybody else is doing it. You get a tax break. Why not? Right? So it maybe not be a true conversion for a lot of them. It wasn't genuine. But you know what? It was good business. It was good politics. And, still today, I'm sure it happens in churches. People come because you know what? They want people to know that I'm a good, outstanding man. I go to church. And you know what? People will buy my product more or vote for me or whatever. It still happens. We don't know people's hearts, but but we're talking about the spiritual tone, the sincerity begin to lower. Many simply baptized, but they still held on to their paganism. Yeah, go ahead and baptize me. Getting wet per se, we're truly converted, and this is gonna. It's like they really had no intention of making any changes. And now we're going to be seeing the increase of paganism come to the church. And then we've already talked about this move of Constantine to Byzantium. Constantinople became to be called, and had been a Christian city, whereas Rome had always been the center of paganism. The emperor moved his capital from Rome. The strongest, again, man remaining, we talked about this, was the bishop of Rome. So power is gravitating to the church, and civilization is falling apart. When the emperor moved out of Rome, the bishop of Rome was all that was left. And because there was no other, by default, he's in it. Again, you know, if in our town, in Claremont, and Leesburg, and Groveland, if, let's say, for some reason, the government packs up and leaves, you know, and it's the church who's the highly structured ones getting things done, you know, that's where power is going to go to, you know, and so that's kind of what happened. Church had to take over in some of these areas. There was a pagan reaction under this guy named Julian the Apostate. He was a nephew of Constantine. The sons of Constantine had purged all relatives who might have been pretenders to the throne. And he was a pagan who pretended to be a Christian. And so, until he got to power, and he decided, well, let's go back to the old ways. You know, I'm tired of this. We've been a couple generations trying Christianity. So that's why they call him the apostate. He went back to the old, he tried to reinstitute the old pagan gods, and, you know, he would say this is what's wrong with Rome because we've gone away from Zeus and all these other people, or you know, and he ruled for 2 years, and then he died in a war with the Persians. He was killed in battle, probably providentially, you know. He wanted to go back to the glory days of Augustus and things like that. And so he even reinstituted persecution on the church for a while. But it wasn't as easy because now Christianity was kind of entrenched in the empire a little more. It wasn't just on the outskirts. You know, people were power, people were of influence. And have you heard this tradition? On his deathbed, Trajan, he makes this statement. He says, on his deathbed, he said, supposed to say, he says, "O Galilean, thou hast conquered." It's like, you know, Jesus got the last word. He couldn't do it in Christianity. He tried to stem the tide, but he just couldn't do it. And then after Julian, formal paganism was dead. Now, that didn't mean pagan ideas, they still continued, but paganism overall, formally, was gone. And, but it still began to influence the church. It still did. So the general picture here, the empire is weakening for all kinds of reasons, economic, civil, spiritually, at least from a pagan point of view. Again, especially in the West. In the East, civilization is durable, there's more wealth. And then over here in the West, you've got these pressure from the northern tribes, these barbarian tribes begin to increase. Christianity is becoming more highly organized in the West. Constantine he ends persecution, he moves to the East, he leaves the church more or less in charge there in the West. And civilization is going to continue again for some time in the East. And but in the West, it declines very, very rapidly. But the organized, historic Catholic Church is going to continue to become more and more centralized, more and more powerful. It's going to begin to make alliances with the state and the church. The state's going to begin to use the church. We're going to see this, where there's going to be no difference eventually between the church and the state. Look at the organization of the church in the 4th century, the imperial state church, as far as the position of the emperor. In the West, the emperors found that circumstances had forced him to assume more and more control over the church, by the way. This shouldn't be the state. The church. And he did not have nor claim absolute control of the church. In the East, though, you know, that's where the power was. The emperor becomes the absolute ruler of the church. And this is where we talk about Caesar papism, where the emperor moved the capital to the east from Constantinople. The office of Caesar and office of Pope kind of began to merge into one. And then you get the position of the bishops. The church is now episcopal. Here we talk about the different kinds of church governments. In the 4th century, and in addition to these bishops who rule over an area, now there begin to appear these metropolitan bishops and patriarchs, bishops over other bishops, you know. You've got these metropolitan bishops called archbishops, right? In Europe, who were bishops over capital cities, and these providences who were over other bishops in that province. And so this began to mimic the pattern of the government around them. The Bishop of Rome, for example, was the metropolitan bishop over southern Italy. So now you have the major centers of areas of civilization. They began to be the bigger, more important bishops versus just, you know, of Podokville over here, you know, versus Rome. You know, they got more people. It's more important. Then you got the patriarchs. They were outstanding. They were outstanding among the bigger city bishops, right? You had a distinction. You know, you had some major cities, but then you had some more important others. And they became the most important cities. Again, Rome, Alexandria, Jerusalem, for old time's sake. I mean, Jerusalem was pretty much gone. I mean, sentimental only, for no other reason. But they exercise authority over areas of the empire. See how this is growing? It goes from the church to an area to huge swaths of a region, over other bishops of other cities. For example, the Bishop of Rome was not only the diocesan Bishop of Rome and the metropolitan southern Italy, he began to be the patriarch of the whole West. Again, the ancients thought of themselves in terms of cities and not nations. That's hard for us to understand. You know, it was not until the Renaissance until you begin to think of nations in a sense, right? We automatically think of nations. They didn't think like that. And that's very hard when we do history to not put ourselves and think like a 21st century person. You know, reading the Bible, it's very difficult to do. You know, as we're reading through the Old Testament right now, my wife and I, you know, we'll have these questions, and it's like, yeah, but that doesn't make any sense, you know? And it's like, you know what? You're right. In our perspective, it doesn't. That's why it's important when you study Bible, you study also culture and how things worked back in that day. That's why, you know, sometimes we've got to be not so quick to judge other people of other cultures. Say, well, they should have done this way. Well, you know what? That's not the way they did it back then. Not at all. It wasn't even on their mind. I'm not saying it's right or wrong sometimes, but we shouldn't put a 21st century mindset, worldview on a first century understanding of things. And you know, there's some things like in Genesis, I think we'll just not completely understand until the Lord comes. Why they did, how they did certain things, because it's almost like you had to be there. And there's certain things we just don't know about culture. Now, that's why archaeology is such a great insight. Sometimes it's like, and even archaeology is limited. And we've only been doing archaeology for like 200 years. Can you imagine another 200 years with, you know, what we're going to find? Insights is going to help us.
When did people quit living 300-400 years? That's one of the things when I'm reading the Old Testament, I start thinking, when did that stop? You know?
Well, you kind of get a good answer there just by reading it. You know, it goes by. It goes down pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so...
Instead of, I think the Bible teaches, instead of the evolution, it teaches de-evolution.
Yeah.
You know? In some
sense. It's clear they used to live through.
It just tells you how powerful that tree of life was.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, it's like the rings of a pond and get, you know, farther and farther.
When I first started studying and stuff, I was like 12, 13, and I used to think that, well, maybe they're just looking at months as years.
Right.
You know? No, they're going by the moon or whatever, you know. And I thought, okay, that would almost make sense, 600 years. But, you know, the more I read it and I take it on faith that 600 years was 600 years.
Yeah, right.
And when did that stop?
You know, that came from mutations coming into the DNA after the fall.
Right.
Any disease, diabetes, they're all our genetic
We
codes
should
were
see a few
perfect.
people going into the 150, 200 225 years old, you know, even after that, but we don't see, you know, if they live 110 years, that's on the news.
But it just makes perfect sense. You
Yeah.
know, that as the genetic code deteriorating more and more, the times keep falling down until we get a steady state
I
now.
think it's what should
It's
happen.
like typing the letter the first time and then making a copy, and making another copy.
Bingo.
You know, and every time you make a copy of the copy, it gets, so think how many thousands of copies you and I are. We're in trouble.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think getting back just to the understanding of culture and how things work, and it's hard to think sometimes unless we put ourselves in those shoes, try the best we can. Top page 40, the councils. It's through the councils that the bishops exercise control during this period. The bishops legislated through councils. And as needs arose, the ecumenical council. That is the council that takes the whole church into, you know that's what we mean by ecumenical. Those which represented the whole church, sometimes called by the emperor himself. Many were called, but the Roman Catholic Church, by the way, recognized only 7 as being valid. Their decisions were final and binding. They were divine revelation and infallible, basically. The reason they only say 7 because that's the one they agree with. That's kind of convenient, isn't it? The idea later came on, though, that God spoke through the councils, which constitutes divine revelation. So, therefore, you understand, we talked about this, the kind of the divide between Protestant and Catholicism is, at least evangelical Christianity is you believe in the Bible only as the final word of revelation. We're in the Roman Catholic Church, no, it's the Bible plus church, tradition, council, pope, all equal authoritative because they believe that God spoke through the councils, through the bishops, through the popes, through the years. That's why it's very hard to debate, argue with a Catholic if you say, well, the Bible says this, but they'll again say, yes, but the councils, the church says this, and in their minds, it's on equal authoritative ground. That's why in the Reformation movement, it was the sola scriptura, on the scriptures alone do we take our stand. You know, that's where the buck stops here. And that's why Luther, again, got so much trouble, you know, we talked about a few weeks ago. There was a lesser clergy. Presbyters had become priests. Remember that I talked about this? It began to mimic the Old Testament, where you're offering sacrifices and all that. It's like, no, that's not what's supposed to happen. We're a priest offering spiritual sacrifice, every one of us, but there became this whole distinction of people who, you know, were served as priests under a bishop, and they were in charge of a single church under the authority of the bishop. The deacons now had declined in importance. They simply became a stepping stone to the priesthood. That's interesting because even today in the Christian church, today it's kind of like deacons are still used like this, I think sometimes. Deacons are like, well, it's just a stepping stone to become an elder. I don't see that in the New Testament. That before you can become an elder, you got to become a deacon. And I think there might be some wisdom in that, but I don't think that's necessarily the plan of the New Testament. It's like, well, before you can become an elder, let's put you in a deacon, just, you know, stepping stone. As though the deacon itself doesn't have an important role to play in the church. And early on that was happening. And then look at these German invasions. You know what's happening? The German tribes before the Great Invasions. And again, this took place over many, many years. Before many tribes were actually converted to Christianity. You don't have to worry about all the details here. That's okay. But when they came in though with a respect for Christianity. Now some of them were going to look at, they were converted to Arianism, which is a heretical view of Christianity. But they were not Orthodox Christians. And they certainly were not mature in terms of the gentler races. The German tribes in the Great Invasions, the Visigoths, Visigoths means the Western Goths, over there by Africa. They broke into the Balkans in 376, then into Italy. It was slowly for many years, breaking their families, their animals. And they were not a war party like. You know, they came to stay. They were immigrating, not raiding. They wanted civilization. They wanted money. They wanted wealth. These Germanic tribes, the northern tribes, Teutonic, Anglo-Saxon. By the way, that's our ancestors, most of us. We're from the barbarians, a lot of us. Again, often we get the picture of these people in the movies that they were wild people, horsemen, wild tribesmen who would rape and loot, etc. And that, again, that's not really a real picture, a true picture. They were barbaric, but again, they were just illiterate, fundamentally uncivilized. Easy for me to say. Civilized. But again, let's say you got a rather barbaric group from the, I don't know, north of here. Yeah, Mascot. No. From Mascot over here. And they're coming, they see Orlando over there because they have flushing toilets, running water, TVs and phones and school system. Well, you know, what would happen if the government left and, or if they came in and took over and run everybody else out? You know, it's one thing to like a public water system, yet it's another to make it run and to make school systems run. You know what I'm saying? So even though they wanted, they liked it, when they came in, they don't do it. That's why it reverted, it went back. Just didn't, they couldn't hang on to it. Because it takes a long time to figure that kind of stuff out. You know, if all the people who ran all the water and the school systems and all the engineers suddenly ran out of town, got killed, good luck, you know. Well, you can look at some of this stuff, you know, the Vandals moved through Spain, and they were exceedingly destructive. That's where we get, you know, the idea of vandalization from these guys. The Burgundians, where we get our Burgundy wine name from, moved into southern part of France, Burgundy, from Burgundy, France.
Mm-hmm.
The Franks, the strongest of these Germanic tribes, moved into southern France. They did not come to southern France as Europe as Christians, by the way. They weren't converted. They were the holdouts. France comes from the word Franks. The Anglo-Saxons invaded England. They drove out the Celtic, kind of like in America, we drove out the Native American type thing. They didn't enter England as Christians either. All right, let's stop for there, and we'll no quiz next week. Just want you to worry about if you. I'm going to leave the midterms over there.